Hello, this is Brian P., and welcome to Scaling the Well. So, today I thought we'd talk about a subject that comes up all the time in pretty much everyone's life, and that's confrontation. And I think this is a very important topic because I think just as human beings, we deal with it on a daily basis. And so, why do I think it's an important topic to discuss? Well, because people don't like confrontation, you know. Now, some people are very, combative, you should say, and they're confronting people all the time. But even those type of people run into situations where they feel uneasy about confrontation. So I thought we'd talk about it a little bit today and why it is good. Obviously, if you're overly combative and you're just constantly getting in fights, that's another topic, and that could that's another way of sometimes people just displaying, a disorder or somebody who's a little bit neurotic. Sometimes it's an insecurity and people who are constantly causing fights, not necessarily physical fights, but verbal or just awkward situations. But that's not what we're talking about. I'm trying to scale this particular conversation to the average everyday person and how confrontation can be good in certain scenarios and why you need to confront other people just, in business, work, family, relationships, whatever. So to start, why do people avoid confrontation? So there's a number of reasons. One could be culture. So, like, if you are from an Eastern culture, it's more harmonious. Like, so people in certain countries in Asia, for example, it's basically the point is more to get along within a group. So, when I studied Japanese history and Japanese business, you have what's called a batsu. And in Japanese culture, if you're in a business environment, your batsu, your group, it could be a group of friends or it could just be a group of coworkers. You're not to outshine anyone. So if you're getting promoted, your whole team gets promoted. It's not like, you're looked down upon if you're trying to take credit for a major accomplishment. Even if you're the one who contributed the most, the credit still should go to the team. And it would be unseemly for you to do otherwise. And in America, it's really different, right? If a lot of people get angry if a other person takes credit or a team takes credit and you did all the work. Americans tend to speak out about that, like, "Hey, wait a minute, yeah, no, I'm the one who did X, Y, and Z." And not even in a confrontational manner, but Americans are, at least in American business culture, we're more likely to step up and say, "Look, I did this, I did that," which can be unseemly too if you do it and first of all, if it's not true, but if you're constantly doing it and not giving credit to others, that again, that's the other extreme. But it's more accepted in Western societies. Also, from a cultural standpoint, in a lot of different, and even in some cultures within the United States, there's the respect of elders, right? So even let's say if you notice that somebody older than you is wrong, it's not always polite to point that out. And I was given an extreme example. I saw this, and I forget which show I saw this on, but they said that there was and I think, I don't remember if it was Korea or Japan, but there was a airline crash of a plane that went down, and basically the elder pilot on board was wrong about the instrument readings, and the younger members of the crew knew that it was wrong, that this person was wrong. Yet, because he was an elder, no one said anything, and everyone died. And I'm not saying that that's like a common thing to happen, but that's just an extreme example of how not confronting someone can lead to disastrous results, and not only for them, but for the passengers who had nothing to do with that particular situation. So I just wanted to discuss this a little bit, and another reason, some people have past trauma. Some people have faced, whether it was childhood trauma or, they were in abusive relationships as adults. You may have face severe, maybe even physical consequences for speaking out or confronting somebody who was abusive to you. And it makes sense that, hey, I got beaten when I used to speak out as a kid, or I got beaten by my partner when I used to stand up for myself. And therefore, obviously, that's going to make you a little bit gun shy, even if you're out of that particular situation when dealing with the world at large. And that's totally understandable. But again, that doesn't mean it's right. I think people should stand up for themselves. And it's not that consequences be damned. It's just that you have to figure out, one, if you're currently in a relationship or a situation like that, finding a way out. And that's a whole nother podcast. And that includes therapy. That might even include an escape plan, But once you're out of that relationship or that situation, how best to go on with your life and continue to accomplish your goals. So, and that's another thing. So you have culture, you have trauma, and then everyone, confrontation is uncomfortable. It's always easy to say yes to anything, and in a management position, you always want to say yes. I've seen this in HR. Somebody requests time off, and yet they don't have the accruals to take that time or to take that leave, or they want to do something and they want to take time off at a specific time of year, and it's like, well, everybody else is off and they already put in first, and yet now you want to say no to that person, knowing that that person's going to be angry or sad even, is very difficult. And so if you want to be a supervisor, if you want to be a manager someday, if you want to own your own business, you're going to have to find ways, to confront people and to actually, and not just bend, not be an enabler, and yet still, deal with that person the next day. And I'm not saying that it's easy. It's a skill that you have to develop. But if you never start to do it, you're never going to develop it. It's like anything else. So I've come up with a few scenarios and a few concepts when it comes to confrontation. The first one, I'll start with just the practicality of confrontation. So I call it, the one fight versus 1,000 fights, and I came up with this because, that old saying about, a coward dies 1,000 deaths, a warrior dies just once, or a hero dies just once. It's kind of the same thing when it comes to confrontation. So if you're in a situation, and it could be in your family, it could be in a relationship, it could be at your work, where you never stick up for yourself, or you never point out an issue or a problem that you see and it's apparent, but you're the only one seeing it, and you're scared to bring that to a superior, or you're scared to bring that to your partner, or you're scared to bring that to different members of your family, that issue doesn't go away. So you could spend the rest of your life avoiding that problem, or you can just get it over with and rip off that Band-Aid and have that confrontation. And it might be very negative, that moment in time where you actually confront someone. And I guess maybe it's better with an example. So on my podcast about enabling, we talk about a little bit about people who are addicts, right? Well, if that person keeps coming to you for money, if somebody's addicted to drugs or alcohol or whatever, or they could just have a personality that's, dependent, and they're just coming to you because their lifestyle says that, dictates that they need resources from other people in order to survive, and they're not willing to go out and acquire those resources themselves. And they come to you, and month after month, you're giving them $10, $100, or whatever. Maybe you're broke. Maybe you yourself are a struggling person, and yet you're giving this money away. It's going to continue to cause problems, because eventually that one person can sink both of you. If you can't make your rent or your car payment, or you can't feed your kids because you're giving money to this other person who should be getting these resources on their own, eventually both of you will suffer. And what's ironic is that the person who's a taker, the addict or the dependent personality in this situation, once your money runs out, they know how to go find somebody else, another enabler who's going to support them. You're the one who's going to be stuck, at the end of the day, trying to figure out what to do. And I see that so many times, again, when I was a social worker, but even just in my personal life with other people, I see it, and it's like, it just drives me mad. I'm like, why don't you just, and again, I understand it from a behavioral science point of view, why people don't say no. But once you start suffering, you would think that suffering sometimes would kind of induce you to do that. But that's how strong our social psychology is, especially if this is a family situation. We tend to just keep on keeping on. And we'll give and give and give, and again, my whole thing about helping versus enabling. I always think of this, if you're helping somebody, think of helping somebody across the street. If you help somebody across the street, they start out on one side of the street, and they end up on the other side of the street, and you don't take them back and forth. It's a one-time thing, and it's over. They don't stay in the middle of the street, and that's it. If that person is in the middle of the street or never makes it to the other side, and every morning you have to help them and they never ever reach the other side of the street, are you really helping them? And you're actually hurting yourself, because you're putting yourself in the way of traffic and all this stuff and all these other issues. So you always have to consider that when it comes to helping versus enabling. And that's a very clear way to distinguish it. If they're going to have the same problem next week, next month, then you haven't helped them at all. And that's when confrontation needs to come in. You need to have that hard conversation. And some of the content of the conversation could be as simply as the word no. And sometimes, you might have to explain things to them, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But you don't want to have to avoid situations ongoing. And again, it could be at work. You could notice a flaw in a process and you don't want to bring it up. Well, if you don't bring it up because your boss is kind of a rough going person or an angry person, and if it's not harming you, okay, I can understand that. You'll go on with your life, and maybe you'll either transfer positions or actually leave the organization. But if you care about the organization, or if it's like a small business that could actually shut down and you'll lose your job, or if it's something that's legal, I've seen this. When I was an investigator, sometimes people don't point out things that could actually have a civil or criminal effect on the entire company. And you were scared to be a whistleblower. Now you're caught up in that, and now other people were caught up in that, and hundreds, if not thousands, of people could lose their job, and then your customers could suffer, and it could be a cascading effect. Remember Enron? Nobody pointed it out, and how many people lost their pensions, and how many people went without power. They talked about the brownouts because of this one company, and nobody wanted to point out any mistakes. Point out the corruption that was going on, and how many thousands, if not millions, of people suffered because of that. And it probably only took one person to say, hey, I see some accounting irregularities, or hey, I heard a conversation about X, or I got a memo about Y. And that would have been it, sent to federal regulators, and maybe a lot of that could have been nipped in the bud. And now we have, like Sarbanes-Oxley and all these laws that had to be created just because no one spoke out. So, again, you'd rather have one unpleasant moment than spending the rest of your life either avoiding unpleasant moments or having smaller unpleasant moments, giving money to somebody every single month, every single week, or whatever it is, forever. So that's the thing. And then let's get into, like I said, sometimes that conversation is just no, right? That's an easy thing. Like, no, I won't do that. But sometimes it gets more complicated. So what's the benefit of this? And what is the some things that you might need to do in order to confront somebody? So I like to think back to when I was, CPS social worker. No, I say a lot because I'm constantly thinking of good examples to give that might resonate with you. So when I was an adoption social worker, a lot of times, and this is the end of the process. So the process would begin, obviously the process begins, somebody calls the hotline about abuse and neglect. And then it goes to, just in short, I'm giving you a very, the microcosm of how child welfare works. Somebody calls the hotline, oh, this kid's being abused. The hotline sends it to whatever region, the family lives in, and it gets assigned to an investigator. I was an investigator for child abuse at one time too. We go out. If we determine there is abuse, we may remove that child. We go to court. Detention hearing goes to another worker. Jurisdictional hearing, dispositional hearing. And then reunification begins. Well, reunification actually technically begins as soon as the child's removed, but the reunification process, once we have jurisdiction, then it becomes legal, and the parents have to do services and improve the, they can rectify whatever issues that led to the child's removal. They typically have 12 months to do that. And sometimes that gets stretched out. It's never really set in stone, but on paper, it's typically 12 months. And if they don't do the things they need, then the judge, at least in the state of California, will say that, well, now that child needs a permanent plan. Then it goes to adoption. So you'll see there's a lot of social workers that get involved before it even gets to adoption. And that's just, the way within the regular process. And sometimes a social worker may get promoted, may quit, may transfer. So it's not uncommon when I was in adoptions, and I'm not saying that this is right, but it's not uncommon by the time the case came to me that the family could have had like 3 or 4, at least, 5, 6 social workers in their life. And if people, and this is, and I say this from even a professional standpoint, even people who have the job of confronting people sometimes don't want to confront people, because when you're in CWS, you're not, I'm not saying we don't remove people from that are pleasant, from parents that are pleasant and kind of docile, but a lot of our clients, they come from rough backgrounds themselves. We're removing from gang members and bikers, and some people even connected to the cartels, and so you're not always wanting to be looked at as the enemy, right? But your job is to get the family through this process. Now, whether or not they want to participate is typically up to them. And when I say them, I mean the parents. They're the adults. The children, they're children. They're kind of stuck, with the situation. But I've seen, when I was in adoptions, I've seen a lot of times that nobody ever really told the parents the consequences. They were just like, okay, this is what the judge needs you to do, or this is what, the state wants you to do. No one ever said, you're going to lose your kids. Your kids could be adopted if you don't do this. And so if you have people who've grown up and lived their whole life kind of playing the system and not really taking ownership of their issues, well, why would they just start doing it then? Especially if no one's being completely honest. You could be half honest with them and say, yeah, this is what you need to do. And then it gets to adoptions, and now it's time to decide a permanent plan, and reunification services have been terminated. And the only permanent plan, if they fail to reunify, is not the kids going back home with the parents. It's adoption, it's guardianship, or long-term foster care, which pretty much, we call it something else now, but something that the state hates. So basically, your kids are going to be raised by someone else. And that's what a permanent plan is. Because the only other permanent plan would be reunification, and that would have already happened. It doesn't happen once it reaches adoption. Once it goes to adoption, that means reunification has failed. That 12 months has lapsed. All the court hearings have lapsed. And now we're going to what was called a 2.6 hearing. It's a 366.26 hearing, which is to decide a permanent plan. And so I was always honest with the parents right away, because they'll get to adoption still thinking they can get their kids back doing whatever, if they were drug addicts, maybe going to an AA class or AA, meeting once a month, when they should have been like in an inpatient program going 5 days a week, or even an outpatient program, and they haven't done it. If it was a domestic violence case, going to their DV program or even anger management or whatever was on their case plan, and they haven't done it. So I would have to be straight up honest, say I am not your social worker. I'm your child's adoption worker. And my goal is to write a court report, evaluate you for 120 days, and write a report that goes to the judge and recommend a permanent plan. And that permanent plan is not for that child to return to you. And I would have to say that a lot of times on day one, because sometimes they would never have been told, what the stakes were. And it's horrible. And nobody should find out that their child is not coming home in court. And if you're somebody who's thinking about going into social work, let me repeat that. No parent should find out their child is not coming home at court. They should know, every month that they are your client, the status of their case. And even if they're rough customers, even if they're a little bit intimidating, it doesn't matter. If you can't be honest with them, then that's not the job for you. So that's one form of why it's important to confront people, because it could, at least you can give people a chance to alter their behavior to their benefit and to the benefit of their children. And that goes for any industry. Police officers have to be combative, or not combative, but confront people all the time, and you have to be good at it. And I think that's what leads to a lot of unfortunate situations with cops, because they don't know how to use confrontation in a way that's not personal. They either want to let someone go or they want to arrest, and that in between nuance is sometimes lost, because confrontation is a skill. So you can confront somebody, you can tell them you're doing wrong, you can tell them why you're doing this, and a lot of times it's explaining the process. So just how I quickly explain the process to you is how a social worker should be explaining the process to the parents on the first day. As soon as that child is going to be removed, that's what should be explained to them. A police officer should be able to explain the process. This is why I pulled you over. This is what I need to see from you, and this is what I need you to do to cooperate. And it needs to be clear. Confusion leads to tragedy often, and that's because people who don't know how to properly confront other people. So, get off that soapbox for a second. Let's talk about basically, and I was just saying, telling people the truth, and this kind of, dovetails into what I was just saying. But if this is a family situation, sometimes you have to explain to somebody, look, this is my budget. If it's somebody who's asking you for money, this is what I need to support my household. And no, I don't have any extra to give to you, period. That's explaining a process. Just like explaining a legal process, it might be explaining your own financial situation to a person. They don't have to accept it, but you're telling them, and it ends with no, and then that's why you're unbending on that. Telling your boss, that there's a process that needs to be looked, or there's an error that was made. And sometimes it's really hard because maybe you're the one who made the error, and that error, may not be found out for a year or two. But when it does come to sunlight, when sunlight does hit it, it could be a catastrophe. And you might oh man, I'm going to get in trouble. But it's still better to let your boss know right away. And that's confrontation. Even though you don't like what's going to happen and the conversation between your boss is going to be a hard one, they're going to have a lot more respect for you if you just come forward and own it. We had a whole podcast about lying. Well, lies of omission, it kind of goes along with not being confrontational when you need to be. So another issue, and I'm not going to belabor this point too much, but how do you do this? because it's easy to say, hey, you need to confront people and you need to point out issues and you need to tell people no. Well, one thing is you need to know your own power. You know, if you work for a company, you have value. Nobody's going to pay you if you don't have value. Nobody, you know, we live in a capitalist society. No one's hiring people they don't need. So if you need to confront your boss on an issue, you need to understand that you do have some power. Yes, that your boss may be more powerful than you. You know, the vice president and the CEO, they all are more powerful than you, but you have value. And you have to be confident in that value, that if you make one mistake, now, obviously, if you're making mistake after mistake after mistake, yeah, you could be terminated. But if you make a mistake and it's an honest mistake, even if it's a big one, you have to be confident that your value is going to win the day and you're going to be forgiven. And they should respect the fact that you brought that attention to them, brought the issue to their attention before it became a bigger problem. And if they don't respect that, I don't think that's a place you want to work, because, you know, as somebody who works in human resources, I respect people, you know, for the sake of the organization, that, hey, well, this is a problem. And, you know, yeah, I made a mistake, you know, what do we do? You know, and that's what every organization should respect, because that's what keeps organizations alive. But also when I talk about knowing your own power, I mean, your personality may not be that of somebody who likes confrontation, or you may be somebody who hates confrontation. So let's say go back to the family environment. Maybe you're the pleaser. Maybe you have these really dominating people in your family, and you're the one always trying to make peace. You're the harmonious one. Well, guess what? That is power too. And a lot of people think power always resides in the people who are the loudest or the most demanding or the angriest. No, sometimes those people are the weakest. And I'll give you an example so let's say you have two world leaders. And they're both alpha males or alpha females or whatever, and they're in the room and they're just unflinching, but they don't speak each other's language. Well, who's the most powerful person in the room? How do you know? Well, both of them might have nuclear weapons at their disposal, armies. They both may be big financial powers. But the most powerful person in the room is actually going to be the translator, because the way you communicate, and you're the one in charge of the communication there, if you're the translator, and you become the most powerful person. And if somebody says something harsh and that translator softens it a little bit, you can actually determine the outcome of that meeting. And so in a family environment, if you're the pleaser, right, if everyone comes to you, and vents about the other person, and you're usually the one that fixes the problems in the family, or takes the hit for everything else, or says, oh, you know what, I'll take care of it, just so you can, if you're the peacekeeper, let's say, you are the most powerful person in that family, even though you may feel like the weakest, because you're the one always taking the brunt of everything and everyone's complaining to you. Again, threaten to step out for a month and say, I'm not going to deal with anybody. All these demanders in there, I'll say demanders versus pleasers. If one of these pleasers steps out, all the people who are demanding are going to be terrified. They're going to be terrified because they're not going to know what to do, because they know that they can't get the other demanders to make things work in that family. They need you. You're the most valuable person. You're the VIP of the family. And you need to recognize that. That's your value. And sometimes, not sometimes, but a lot of times, the people who are the pleasers, the peacemakers, they feel so put upon, and they feel like they're the weakest in the family. And I'm telling you, no, you're not. You're the one who has the ability to confront more than anyone else, because everyone needs you. And if you stepped away from that family environment, that family's going to fall apart, and everybody who's making these demands of you, they know it. Nobody likes to have their roles shoved in their face. Nobody likes to have their neediness shoved down their throat. I'm not saying that you will step away from your family. I'm not even advocating um, that you should neglect your family in any way. I'm saying that if you're the one who has been taking on the lion's share of the work, then you also have the lion's share of the power. Whether or not you know it or not, they know it. And sometimes you need to act on that, even if it's a slight threat. You know, I've seen people who've been putting up with their family for years. They threatened to step away because they got fed up, or they met somebody who now they're in a relationship where they're going to go away. I've seen families throw money at them in order to keep them from stepping away or changing their role. So that's pretty much it for today. I just want people to know that confrontation, again, you want to have one uncomfortable moment versus a million. You know, I said 1,000, but really it could go on for your entire life, you know, because some of these times you are the peacemaker, and that starts in childhood, and you end up doing it until your 80s, you know, because that's the way your family structure is set up. Whether it's at work, in a relationship, or whatever, confrontation is a necessity, and you have to be willing to do it. And I'm not saying it's easy. There's certain techniques, and there's lots of books out there on how to do it, but you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's my message for today. I'm Brian P. This has been Scaling the Well.